Diversity in the United States of America is continually growing each year. The demographics for the U.S. are constantly changing. Debates have been brought up on multicultural education. It has primarily been focused on the content integration and has ignored other important dimensions of multicultural education. Multicultural education has been broadly conceptualized with all of the various dimensions included. These dimensions need to be more carefully defined. According to Banks and Banks, there are 5 dimensions of multicultural education. These 5 dimensions are content integration, knowledge construction, prejudice reduction, equity pedagogy, and empowering school culture and social structure. Of these 5 dimensions, Banks and Banks focuses on equity pedagogy. They define equity pedagogy as teaching strategies and classroom environments that help students from diverse racial, ethnic, and cultural groups attain the knowledgeable skills and attitudes needed to function effectively within and help create and perpetuate a just, humane, and democratic society. Equity pedagogy challenges the ideas of instruction. It sees the teacher as the citadel of knowledge and views the students as the passive recipients of knowledge. Equity pedagogy focuses on the use of effective instructional techniques and methods. It also focuses on the context in which these instructional techniques and methods are used. This challenges teachers' use of teaching strategies that facilitate the learning process for students. Teachers should generate knowledge and create new understandings instead of having students memorize the knowledge. When students create new understandings and make connections, they are more likely to retain the information long term. Implementing equity pedagogy requires teachers to understand their students and how they perceive social interactions. Teachers must also know how each of their students learns best and how that student perceives them as the teacher. Student relationships with the teacher are important for equity pedagogy and hidden curriculum. Another form of pedagogy is culturally relevant pedagogy. Ladson-Billings says that culturally relevant pedagogy rests on 3 criteria. First, students must experience academic success. Second, students must develop and/or maintain cultural competence. Lastly, students must develop a critical consciousness through which they challenge the current status quo of the social order. With culturally relevant pedagogy, the teacher must have a non-judgmental viewpoint of each student. The teacher must also be aware of each student's cultural backgrounds. Culturally relevant pedagogy is a way for schools to acknowledge the home community culture of students. Social studies is concerned with the study of people, their lives, and their relationships as they interact with the socio-cultural environment. Developing appropriate knowledge and right attitudes towards multicultural education concepts in social studies is essential for peaceful coexistence in any society. When using pedagogy, it helps students become critical thinkers. It allows them to understand multiple perspectives and viewpoints. Teachers should emphasize and encourage them to see multiple perspectives. Building community is another aspect to take into account whenever using pedagogy. This way, the students will be more respectful towards each other's thoughts and answers to questions. Building community creates a climate of mutual respect and helps students build positive relationships, resolve conflicts, and develop group problem-solving skills. Building community also encourages students to engage in discussions and interact socially and culturally with different racial, ethnic, cultural, and language groups. Mason observed teachers integrating multicultural education into their lessons. Mason gives the example of how Sacagawea is described in relation to the Lewis and Clark expedition. The teacher he observed underplayed the role that Sacagawea played in the expedition. The teacher did this by saying she helped the 2 explorers, when really Sacagawea was the only reason Lewis and Clark were able to accomplish their goal. With the teacher saying this, it turned her into a serviceable other. It portrays her as the other so that she is seen as something different and not seen the same as the majority group. Mason suggests using teacher talk in a way that legitimizes roles of historical figures so that they do not merely exist, but so that they each have their own motives and goals. Benji's did a study on whether or not multicultural education and culturally relevant pedagogy can be used to increase student interest in social studies. 6 of his students came from a military background. Several students enjoyed hunting and/or farming, and that there were many different races in the classroom. Benji's took all of this into account and included multiple accounts from people who wrote and experienced firsthand the Trail of Tears. The writings were similar to the students' interests, cultures, and races, so that it would spark interest in the students. The students were able to pick a primary source that matched their gender, race, or culture. Benji's made sure to select primary sources so that they would deeply reflect the cultures and values. Benji's concluded that increasing multicultural education and culturally relevant pedagogy did, in return, increase students' interest in the lesson. There are many books that can be used inside the classroom that incorporate diversity and multicultural education. One example is The Other Side. This book is written by Shelley Tanaka and includes a white girl and a black girl separated by a fence. White Socks Only, written by Evelyn Coleman, is another example that includes African Americans and a grandmother telling a story about segregation. Another example is the book Grandfather's Journey, written by Alan Say. This book is about Say's grandfather's voyage from Japan to the United States and then back again. It is important to include books that encourage diversity and multicultural education throughout lessons to gain students' interest. History needs to be made relevant to the lives of the students in order for them to gain interest and have a better understanding. In Benji's article, it says that teachers need to continue expanding their use of multicultural education and culturally relevant pedagogy in order to make the content relevant and interesting to their students. Multicultural education is a way to attempt to integrate different cultures and backgrounds of every student in the classroom. Banks and Banks say that multicultural education is for everyone and that it should empower people. Culturally relevant pedagogy focuses on the use of different cultures and backgrounds of the students to help them achieve academically. Giroux believes that critical pedagogy is the base of the pyramid and the concept that lays the groundwork for everything else. Multicultural education is next, being the broad notion that is needed to integrate a wide variety of cultures and backgrounds in instruction. Lastly, culturally relevant pedagogy takes place, taking the basic concepts of multicultural education and fitting it specifically for the individual students. Critical pedagogy makes it clear that the traditional model of a school with the teacher as the leader truly oppresses students. Through critical pedagogy, Giroux believes that using the tenets of critical pedagogy, mainly focusing on the critical thinking and moving away from just teaching the majority, then multicultural education and culturally relevant pedagogy can begin to be implemented into the classroom. In doing this will increase the students' academic success and interest throughout the classroom.